On the one hand, today I want to talk about one of Jesus' parables. It's a parable of the absentee landlord and the tenants of a vineyard. But on the other hand, I think it's also about how to interpret a parable and how a shift in your starting point, which gives you your perspective, can completely change what you think the parable is about. So to go through the parable first, then I'll go through a kind of conventional interpretation, and then I'll look through a different lens to try to see a less often seen perspective. It's in Matthew's Gospel, and what happens there's someone who owns a vineyard, and he moves away, and he leaves tenants in charge of the vineyard. And then when it comes to harvest time, he sends some of his slaves to pick up the harvest from the tenants. But the tenants refuse to pay, give the goods, and in fact they bump off the slaves who've been sent there and chase others away because they don't want to give the harvest up. And so the landlord does it again. So this is strange. So he sends some more people, sort of his slaves, to pick up the harvest, and again they are killed. And then the landlord thinks to himself, well, look, they must respect my son. If they don't respect my slaves, they must respect my son. So he sends his son to pick up the harvest, and even his son is killed. And this is a spin by Jesus, which has got quite a conventional analogy, which is the vineyard is Israel, and Israel's often been referred to as a vineyard all over the Bible. And then there are the prophets in the past who have tried to call Israel back to Israel's true calling, which is to be God's chosen people and behaving in a way which shines with God's glory. And the prophets aren't listened to. They say you should behave in such and such a way, and they don't, and so the selfish behaviour goes on. So then other prophets get sent forward. I mean, you could even think in Jesus' own era, John the Baptist gets sent forward to try and recall people to behave how they should do. And literally we know John the Baptist gets killed because of what he's saying. And then, of course, Jesus is sent by his son, so it's God's own son, gets to Israel. And although this hasn't happened yet at the time when Jesus is speaking the parable, we know that Jesus will be killed by his own people, if you like. I mean, the Romans as well, but it's part of the parable that he gets killed by his own people. And certainly the audiences of Luke's Gospel would have known this and seen it. And in a sense, then the vineyard is given to other new tenants. And this is about how, God's glory was once to shine just in Israel. But if you're going to kill Jesus, and the people of Israel are going to be responsible for that, just be careful how you think about that, because of course there's all sorts of anti-Semitic interpretations there. But then the glory will be given to the Gentiles, to the peoples, and this is the story of the Christian gospel. So that is there, and it's quite an intuitive allegory and a normal interpretation. Now, why was my mind shifted to think about something more about this? It was hanging out with a Bible study with some people from Southern Africa, and people who lived, they were Zimbabweans, and they had worked on farms. They were black Zimbabweans, they had worked on white-owned farms, where the farmer was very distant. Now, I'm not saying this was the case everywhere, but when they hear this parable, which is about there are people who are doing all the work. They're doing all the work in the farm. And once you get to produce time, the absentee landlord, who hasn't done anything really to help you out, comes and says, okay, give me the harvest, because I'm going to sell it on to whatever, sell the food on, and in their terms, this is some multinational company which will sell it to other people, and you won't get the benefit of the food. They're not sympathising with the absentee landlord who owns the vineyard. They're sympathising with the workers. Even if the workers are rising up and behaving badly, their sympathy is with the workers. The workers have done all the work. What is this? How can you side with some absentee landlord sending his slaves? So like there's a slave owner going to pick up the work which has been done by you, and you're just going to make it minted off the back of these people working in the vineyard. Of course, you're going to rise up against him. Well, I'm not necessarily going to go that far, because I think that is a problematic behaviour. How can you ever justify murder? But I think there is something interesting and important in viewing the parable, not just in terms of the allegory about Jesus coming to earth and being rejected, but in this dispute, which it's almost like seeing it as like a union dispute. It's almost like, the workers revolting against the capitalist aristocracy or bourgeoisie or whatever they want, revolting against the people who are owning the landowning classes. And sometimes you've got to see the side of the workers. Again, I wouldn't go the whole far, but then if you just step back a bit, even if you don't want to say, yeah, no, I'm up with these murderous workers, what you can see is the problem of distance and lack of communion, if you like, or fellowship between the absentee vineyard owner and the workers. At some point, there has entered a distance in that relationship in which they don't think they're on the same team anymore. They're not one shared project, producing the grapes for the wine, which they're all going to kind of share in some cooperative or anything like that. They have managed to lose contact with each other and lost sympathy with each other. And in that sense, it's like the parable of the lost sympathy. And it's not just, yes, it can be companies and workers. Actually, it can be about friendships as well. If you allow distance to fester, whether that's physical or emotional distance, when there's an argument and you've lost that sense of connectedness, it becomes a just very complicated minefield. Even in a marriage, you know, you can be physically together, but if you are allowing emotional distance and you don't actually bring to the fore some of the things you need to talk about, distance comes in, and then one party can start to resent the other and think the other person's being unreasonable. So on the one hand, yeah, this is just a clear-cut allegory of Jesus' presence on earth. You can view it very politically. I also think you can just view it as a tragedy of allowing distance to come in place of communion between humans, and we have to guard out for that.